Imagine finding absolute, profound spiritual peace right in your own backyard.
Right.
Like you're out there with your hands in the dirt, cultivating life, feeling deeply connected to the earth. But then you slowly realize that your exact method of finding that peace is actually, well, a textbook form of historical erasure.
Yeah, it's a harsh realization.
It really is.
Mhm.
And that's what we're getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission is to explore what happens when this profound, totally sincere reverence for nature collides directly with the unacknowledged, often violent history of the land itself.
Which is such a massive topic.
Totally. We're drawing from a really nuanced piece of writing today titled The Racist Gaia Worshipper, and we're going to look at the psychological mechanics of why the pursuit of spiritual purity, so often leads to historical amnesia.
And I think it's important to note right off the bat that this dynamic plays out everywhere. It's not just in spirituality.
Oh, for sure.
We are fundamentally looking at how the human brain uses aesthetics and this general feeling of goodness as a defense mechanism. It's how we avoid the uncomfortable reality of systemic guilt. Because, we all want to feel connected to the spaces we inhabit, but we rarely want to look the actual cost of that connection.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because the best way to understand this mechanism is to look at the very specific archetype that anchors this whole discussion.
Right, the central figure of the text.
Yeah. So we have this woman who explicitly calls herself a daughter of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know someone exactly like
Oh,
this.
absolutely.
Her environment is just meticulously curated. She has these quartz crystals lined up on every single windowsill to catch the light.
Doing her own composting, right?
Yes. She's out there composting. She's built this beautiful, dedicated altar to Gaia in her living room. It's draped in moss, dried lavender. And she collects these little ceramic frogs from coastal weekend markets. And honestly, no shade to the ceramic frogs. It sounds incredibly peaceful.
It does. It sounds lovely. But that peacefulness is entirely by design.
Right.
It's a highly intentional environment that serves a specific psychological function for her.
How so?
Well, by surrounding herself with the immediate, tangible elements of nature, the dirt, the crystals, the herbs, she is creating this localized cosmology, a world where her connection to the earth is the truest form of ownership.
Ah, okay.
She speaks about the land as though she's inherited it through sheer spiritual merit. In her mind, that deep emotional resonance completely transcends something as mundane as, legal deeds or property lines.
Right. She feels this soul-level ownership. But here's the catch. She is expressing this deep spiritual ownership of the land to another woman in her neighborhood.
This is where it gets really tense.
Yeah, because this second woman is someone whose actual ancestors tended the exact land directly beneath the subdivision where those crystal-lined windowsills now stand.
Exactly.
And the Gaia worshiper is completely oblivious to this fact, or, perhaps more accurately, she has learned over time just not to ask those kinds of questions.
That is the critical tension right there. It's not just two people having different hobbies. It's two entirely different paradigms of what it means to actually belong to a place.
Yeah. When I was looking at this, I immediately thought of it like, imagine moving into this stunningly beautiful, fully furnished house.
Okay, yeah.
You walk around, running your hands over the woodwork. You're praising the incredible architecture, feeling this deep, soulful connection to the energy of the space. But you are completely willingly ignoring the fact that the original builders and inhabitants were forcibly evicted so that you could live there. Like, you're constantly praising the house, but your very presence requires erasing the hands that built it.
That is a perfect analogy because it highlights the exact mechanism of the erasure we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, you aren't actively insulting the builders. You are just behaving as if the house spontaneously generated itself specifically for your comfort.
Wow, yeah. Spontaneously generated.
And we see this clash of paradigms in a very brief, incredibly telling encounter between the two women in the text.
At the neighborhood meeting.
Yes. They are at this meeting discussing a local development proposal. And the Gaia worshiper stands up and she speaks very sincerely, with real emotion, about the vital need to honor the land.
And the other woman, the one with actual ancestral ties to that exact soil, she just stays quiet.
She doesn't say a word.
She doesn't yell. She doesn't cause a scene. Because her lineage of earth reverence is entirely different. It's older, and it is entirely undecorated.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. It doesn't require a moss-draped altar or public performance at a meeting.
Yeah.
because it is simply known in her hands and her feet.
Yes.
It is this highly practical, generational knowledge, like knowing exactly how to read the microclimate, knowing when the frost hits, what to plant, and why.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that it's the difference between an adopted aesthetic and an uninterrupted continuum.
Uninterrupted continuum, I like that.
The ancestral woman doesn't harbor this burning hatred for the Gaia worshiper. She has simply moved past the massive energy cost of that anger. Her spirituality wasn't some new destination she discovered one weekend at a yoga retreat. It was never not there. It's just the baseline of her existence.
Which brings us to the part of this discussion where I really struggle. And I suspect a lot of you listening might be thinking the same exact thing.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, I have to genuinely challenge the premise here for a second. We are establishing that the Gaia worshiper's framework is harmful. But she isn't a villain.
No, not at all.
She isn't faking her love for the environment for social media clout or something. The love is incredibly real. She literally weeps when she watches documentaries about coral bleaching.
She does.
She goes out of her way to bring food to our neighbors. She is actively composting, recycling, putting genuinely positive energy into the world.
It's true.
So, if this woman is fundamentally doing good things, caring for nature, helping her community, why does the author argue her framework is harmful? Aren't we just policing her thoughts by telling her that her internal spiritual framework is wrong?
It's a fair point.
Right, like if I'm feeding the homeless and cleaning up the local park, does it really matter if my spirituality is a little self-centered?
That is exactly the right question to ask,
Yeah.
because it forces us to look at the difference between individual good deeds and systemic accountability.
Okay, go on.
The danger here doesn't come from her actions. Composting is good. Helping neighbors is good. The harm comes from how her mind uses those good actions as a psychological shield. This is the core of what the text calls spiritual bypassing wrapped in earth tones.
Spiritual bypassing. Okay, break that down for me. How exactly does that mechanism work?
So spiritual bypassing happens when a person uses spiritual ideas or practices to avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, or, in this specific case, systemic complicity.
Oh, I see.
The Gaia worshiper has built this entire belief system that confirms her own elemental goodness. But that system provides absolutely zero theology or mechanism for accountability when she causes harm or when she benefits from historical harm.
Right.
In her worldview, the earth only forgives and renews.
Because nature operates in seasons and cycles,
Yeah.
she just projects that onto morality. Everything is just washed clean.
Precisely. The earth, as she has constructed it in her mind, never taps her on the shoulder and asks her to look around and see who is missing from the room.
Oh, that's heavy.
It is. Because her spirituality positions her goodness as something rooted in the natural world, she lacks the cognitive framework to process the idea that her very presence on that land, enjoying that peace, is directly linked to someone else's displacement.
So the spirituality isn't just a hobby for her. It's an active defense mechanism.
Exactly.
She can be entirely connected to the soil in her backyard, growing her heirloom tomatoes, but still be the direct beneficiary of a system that violently removes someone else from that exact same soil.
Yes.
And her spirituality essentially acts as noise-canceling headphones. It allows her to feel the base of the earth without hearing the screams of history.
That's a haunting way to put it, but yes, absolutely. It creates this illusion of discovery.
What do you mean by illusion of discovery?
Well, when we treat our connection to the earth, or our spiritual awakening, as a brand new, unprecedented discovery, we're actually committing an act of disrespect.
Right.
There is a deeply profound concept at play here in the text. It says, the earth has been worshipped without interruption. The worshipers were interrupted.
Wow. The worshipers were interrupted. That just stops you in your tracks.
It really changes the entire context of modern spirituality. The harm begins the exact moment your personal awakening doesn't automatically include the question, who was already awake to this and what happened to them?
Yeah, if you don't ask that, you're missing the whole picture.
Right. When you curate an aesthetic around reverence and treat it as your own personal origin story, without acknowledging those violently interrupted lineages, you aren't just being naive, you are actively participating in selective amnesia.
And this selective amnesia isn't just about forgetting history.
Yeah.
Right? Here's where it gets really interesting, because it fundamentally alters how we process truth itself. This is where we get into the concept of a broken epistemology. For you listening, if you aren't familiar, epistemology is essentially the study of knowledge how we know what we know, and what justifies our core beliefs.
Right.
And the issue with this brand of modern spirituality is a fundamentally broken way of knowing. It is an epistemology that constantly, relentlessly centers the worshiper's own personal emotional experience as the only valid metric for truth.
Yes, exactly. If feeling good and feeling peaceful becomes your ultimate metric for spiritual truth, your brain will naturally reject any information that disrupts that peace.
It has to protect the peace.
Right. It is an epistemology that allows a person to comfortably adopt the attractive trappings of various global traditions while completely stripping them of their actual history and context.
It's like using a really aggressive beauty filter on a photograph.
Oh, I like that.
You apply the spiritual filter, and it makes the current subject you look incredibly pure, vibrant, and glowing. But the filter deliberately blurs out the messy, complicated, often bloody historical background, so you just don't have to look at it.
Right.
The picture looks great, but it's a total distortion of reality.
The photo filter is the perfect analogy because it requires active processing to maintain the illusion. It's not passive. And we see this play out in very specific, normalized ways in wellness and spiritual communities all the time.
Oh, definitely.
Think about the pervasive use of white sage or patchouli, adopted purely as a calming aesthetic, or, even more strikingly, the way the poet Rumi is consumed in the West.
The Rumi example is wild.
It really is.
People quote him in translation constantly. They post his quotes over pictures of sunsets on social media, finding this deep, universal, slightly vague spiritual meaning in his words.
While remaining completely blissfully unaware that his actual name was Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi, and that his work is not some generic universalist poetry about good vibes.
No, not at all.
It is deeply, inextricably rooted in rigorous Islamic theology and jurisprudence.
Right. But dealing with Islamic theology is complicated for a modern, Western spiritual consumer.
It requires context.
Exactly. It requires context, so the broken epistemology just filters it out. It takes the aesthetic comfort of the poetry, the good vibes, and ignores the roots because the roots are culturally inconvenient.
And this brings us to a really fascinating sociological puzzle.
Let's hear it.
Why are movements that specifically position themselves as progressive or countercultural so incredibly vulnerable to this exact kind of blind spot? Take sacred feminine spirituality, for example. You would think a movement deeply focused on healing, on elevating the marginalized, and on reconnecting with the sacred feminine would be hyper-aware of historical displacement and erasure.
You would think so. Let me see if I can deduce this, because I think it ties back to the defense mechanism we were talking about. If I join a movement like that, I am positioning myself as the corrective force. I am part of the counterculture that is actively trying to heal what industrialization and patriarchy broke. Therefore, I feel inherently rebellious. I feel like I'm automatically on the right side of history.
Exactly. You are the good guy fighting the bad system.
Right. And because I feel with absolute certainty that I am doing the work of correcting historical wrongs, I just assume my methods and my frameworks are inherently pure.
Yes.
I develop a massive blind spot. I assume that because my intentions are poor, my presence cannot possibly cause harm. I've basically given myself a free pass.
That is the trap of perceived purity. Practitioners often arrive at these blind spots with absolute unwavering certainty that they have already transcended them.
Wow.
They assume their reverence for the earth gives them blanket immunity from participating in systemic harm. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author gives a really stark warning. The reality is that if your version of Mother Earth only ever reflects your own face back at you, if your spirituality only ever caters to your comfort, your preferred aesthetic, and your deep desire for absolution, you aren't actually worshiping anything ancient.
No, what are you doing?
You are just worshiping yourself with better lighting.
Worshiping yourself with better lighting. That is devastating.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
Because it's so subtle. You think you are bowing to the universe, but you've just placed a mirror on the floor.
Right. It's the ultimate ego trap disguised as ego death.
So what does this all mean? How do we break the mirror? What happens to the Gaia worshiper in this scenario?
Well,
We have this immense tension. We have this broken epistemology of the photo filter. And we have the neighbor who holds the quiet, heavy, generational knowledge of the land.
right.
It feels like it's building toward a massive, dramatic confrontation. Does the neighbor call her out at the next neighborhood meeting?
No, and that is perhaps the most profound and challenging part of this entire dynamic. There is no explosive confrontation.
Really?
There is no viral moment. The resolution is defined by a very quiet, very slow unlearning. The Gaia worshiper isn't publicly shamed or dragged in front of the neighborhood association.
Okay, so what happens?
Instead, someone she genuinely respects quietly and carefully tells her a small, true piece of the land's actual history.
Wow, so it's not even delivered as a lecture or a formal reprimand.
No.
They just share a piece of the story that was always available, always true, but that the worshiper had managed to filter out.
Yes. And the worshiper's reaction is what separates someone who is merely performing spirituality from someone who is actually capable of growth.
What does she do?
She is quiet for a long time. The cognitive dissonance finally sets in. The filter drops.
And then she does something incredibly symbolic, but with massive psychological weight. She goes home, and she takes her beautiful altar down.
She really does.
The moss, the carefully dried lavender, the perfectly arranged crystals, the ceramic frogs. She dismantles the entire thing.
Yeah.
And what stands out to me here is the why. She doesn't do this as some form of self-flagellation. She doesn't take a picture of the empty table and post a long, agonizing apology online so that her friends will rush into the comments to tell her she's still a good person.
Which, I mean, would just be another form of centering herself.
Exactly. It would be using her guilt to extract comfort from the community.
Yeah.
But she doesn't do that. So why does she actually take it down?
She takes it down because she finally realizes that the structure of her belief system simply cannot hold the truth she just learned.
Oh, that makes sense.
The altar, as it was built, only had room for her peace. It needs to be rebuilt entirely differently.
Right.
It needs to be rebuilt with far more room in it for history, with far more unresolved questions, and with significantly less certainty about what the earth somehow owes her in exchange for her reverence.
It's a transition from a theology of comfort to a theology of reality.
That is the definition of a much harder kind of devotion. In this framework, true devotion isn't about perfectly performing your love for the earth so you can feel absolved and clean.
Yeah.
It's the realization that the earth remembers everything. The blood, the displacement, the forced removals. What the earth actually asks for isn't a performance of love. It asks for radical honesty.
Honesty about what that love has cost.
Yes, honesty about what the love has cost,
Sure.
who exactly was forced to pay that cost, and whether we have ever stopped to say thank you to the right people.
Which is huge.
It is. And this isn't a political statement, although it obviously has political implications. It is simply a fundamental requirement of belonging to a place.
You can't just ignore it.
Exactly. You cannot claim to revere a space while actively erasing its memory. Accountability is woven directly into the reverence. You absolutely cannot separate the two.
Because if you try to separate them, you just end up back in that brightly lit, furnished room, praising the architecture while standing on the ghosts of the builders.
Precisely.
So for you listening, as we pull all these threads together, the core takeaway from this deep dive is that true reverence, whether we are talking about your personal spirituality, the way you operate your business, or just how you navigate your community, it requires absolute accountability.
It demands that we abandon that illusion of discovery.
Right. If we treat our current knowledge, our current professional success, or our current spiritual peace as a brand new phenomenon, if we act like history started the exact moment we arrived on the scene, we end up living a deeply sealed, oblivious existence.
I really do.
They might be doing good things, might have beautiful, pure intentions, but we remain completely disconnected from the full, often painful truth of the ground we are standing on. We become trapped in our own selective amnesia.
And to leave you with something to really mull over long after we sign off today, think about the altars you've built in your own life.
Yeah.
And I don't mean moss and crystals. I mean the structures you use to validate your own goodness, your professional achievements, the personal philosophies or political ideologies you cling to, or even the neighborhoods you call home.
Mm-hmm.
Are those altars built on a story you've actively agreed not to finish? What might happen if you took them down just for a moment to see whose foundation you are actually standing on?
That is the harder kind of devotion. It's taking the beauty filter off and finally looking at the whole picture. Messy background and all.
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the things that feel the most comfortable, keep interrogating the spaces you occupy, and as always, keep looking for the unedited truth.